So at SingleStore, we have been trying to draw insights from data and improve our product and features accordingly. So for that, as you can imagine, we need to collect a lot of data, a lot of usage data. So how many of you uses analytics at their product or company? Okay, and who really knows the ins and outs of product analytics? Okay, so today I want to share with you what I wish I had known about front-end user tracking. I'm Marta. I'm a software engineer at SingleStore for 3 years now. And outside of work, I'm probably playing with my dog, reading, or training for my next run. SingleStore is a cloud-native, highly scalable database that powers mostly intensive data applications with transactional and analytics workloads. And before I start, I want to give you a context about our analytics stack. So this is what looks like. We have a couple of applications and web properties that connect to Segment and through Segment to other services. They are Mixpanel, Sentry, Google Analytics. You probably have heard about some of these services, and we use them through Segment, as I was saying. One Segment account only, and everything connected. So Segment is a customer data platform and works as an abstraction layer between our applications and the services we want to connect to. And it has been a lifesaver for us because every time that you want to update any of these integrated services, you just need to update your configurations on Segment instead of changing your code and deploying a new version or big changes. You don't need to do that. You just need to update Segment configurations. On the other hand, if you want to connect not only your web application to Segment, but instead your backend, for example, you can do that. It's useful if you want, for example, to avoid ad blockers, or if you have any other use case, you can connect your backend as well to Segment. So this leads me to my first advice. Use a tool like Segment. I'm not here advertising Segment, so feel free to use any other tool. There are a couple of them that do the same thing. But again, it has been a lifesaver for us, and it's really easy to manage our analytics and our integrations like that. So jumping on our applications. I was telling you that we have several applications. One of them is our public website, where we have our documentation, public-facing information, and it leads to the sign-up page. And I learned that you can track usage before sign-up. So if you don't have any mechanism for that, you will have a bunch of users that some of them might convert and sign up on your product, and then you know who they are. So you have some analytics and usage before the sign-up, and you have the data about the product flow after the sign-up, but you don't have any correlation because you only have the ID, the unique ID that you're going to use after the sign-up. But if you use a technology or a tool that has anonymous ID implemented, like Segment has, this means that you can track the whole flow, because Segment generates an ID and stores it on the client side. And once the user signs up, it just correlates the unique ID with the generated ID with the unique ID that we're going to use for the whole flow. And this means that you have access to the whole flow, to the big picture, and you can, for example, understand what has the user visited or what did the user before signing up. So talking a little bit more on the implementation side, my next advice is build a common analytics library from the beginning. And this is what can look like. So you can have all your logic as a reusable code. This means that you will follow all the conventions every time that you're using your functions. For example, you can have your cookie banners extracted. You can have track event function. And again, this means that you are always following the same rules. And you all know the perks of reusing code. So if you want, you can have its own package. And this is extremely useful if you want to reuse your analytics package between projects and products. And you can have this benefit of sharing the same code for your analytics tracking API between products. So now you might be thinking that you need an extra complex API, super structured for that. And I think you should build a tracking events API that suits your needs in the near future. And if you have a product in early stage where it's easy to miss analytics because you're too focused on functionality, where you don't want to add complexity to the development process, you might want to focus on the data first, on foster the culture of getting the data, and worry with complexity and structure later. We have, actually, this is how we have our analytics track function implemented. We allow event ID to be passed and then a bunch of properties. So this is a very open API, not super restricted. So it's really easy to log events, and developers don't have an excuse to not do that. But if you have a more mature product and you're feeling like you have a lot of data, a lot of features, it's easy to lost event naming track. If you feel like you should validate your naming and enforce conventions, maybe it's time to start structuring your API and ensure conventions are followed and validations as well. We are transitioning to this point now, so this is what we are planning to implement soon. And again, it all depends on what suits your needs in the future, in the present, and worry about the API that you're going to need later. So talking about the API, in both cases, but probably especially if you don't have a very structured API, really think carefully about your event naming. Event naming is the ID of the event that is triggered when the user interacts with something on your application, and it's used to build dashboards to understand the data. So every time that you want to track a flow or an interaction, you will need the event ID. You can build these automatically if you have an API that does that for you, for example, based on the feature, on the action, or any other information that might be useful. Or you can just allow the developer to choose the name they want and log with that. And I'm telling you to be careful because, as I was saying, this is the ID that you're going to use to build dashboards and to draw conclusions from data. And this means that every time you change the name, you will lose the power to correlate the data. So if you have different names every month, you won't be able to correlate the data in a year, for example, or at least it won't be easy. So as less often you do that, the easier it will be, even for product managers and designers, whoever uses the dashboards and who reads the data, it's way easier if the name keeps the same. And how to keep track of the naming? Segment and Mixpanel and other tools allow you to export all the events. You can have your own validation using TypeScript, for example. The thing that I tell you that it doesn't work is having a manual sheet updated because it is going to be outdated. We have tried and we gave up. And if you're looking for good naming, it's good if you help your peers on your code review suggest better naming, or even remind them that we should log analytics in the new feature, for example, because if they are too focused on the implementation, they might forget about analytics. So it's always useful if someone reminds. And there are sometimes properties that might be useful in the future to log along with events, so really try to keep an eye on that. And if you have a future release checklist, try to add it there so it makes sure it's covered, or for example, add it to your definition of done or to your merge request summary template, whatever it works for you. So you try to have it added every time a new feature or refactor is done. And when you're testing the feature or when you are implementing, it's really useful to use a debugger. Segment has its own debugger, and you can just in real time see the events that are fired when you interact with your application. Mixpanel also has a debugger, so you might just use the one you prefer. But we use Segment to see if all the flows that we want to be covered are rightly done, if properties are being logged correctly, for example, if you are logging data from a form. So it has been really useful for testing your code locally or even in production. For example, a product manager wants to build a dashboard about a feature. They can just interact with the product in production, deployed, and see the events that are being fired. Now you might be thinking, okay, but if I'm doing that locally, wouldn't I be polluting my data? And the answer is yes, if you use only one source, and no, if you use different sources. So we actually have one source for development, another one for staging, and another one for production. So this means that we can test the events we want locally or in staging, and we make sure that the data from the deployed product is not has not noise data. And I couldn't talk about analytics or front-end usage tracking without talking about privacy. This is a very sensitive matter, and I'm not here to give you legal advice, but I just want to give you some heads up about some stuff. Cookies. Be careful of loading non-essential cookies, because unless the user has accepted them explicitly, you can't do some stuff, log events if you're using. There are tools that use cookies, like Segment does, and we lose about 30% of data because of that. And there are other tools like Fathom Analytics that don't use cookies. So be sure what is the tool you're using and the rule that you need to follow. You have heard about regulations like GDPR or CCPA. So take into account the countries that your product acts in and is present, and be sure you're following the regulations of those countries. And never log personal identifiable information that may be address or credit card numbers. So make sure you don't log them. These analytics tools sometimes automatically masks the data for you, but it's better to be on the safe side and don't log any of these data. But at the end of the day, it doesn't matter if you have all data in the world if you take nothing from it. So my last advice is draw insights from data. Try to understand how users use your product, what are the pain points, what can be improved to meet their expectations. And once you have the data, there are two ways to read the data. The first one is using tools as Mixpanel, as I've mentioned before, where you can build data representation and data visualization boards and reports, or you can use just a regular database and query, run queries against the data. Let's focus on the tools first. We use Mixpanel, as I was saying. This is what the dashboard looks like. On your left, you have the events that you need the event ID that I've mentioned. This is a funnel chart. You can build different types of charts like pie charts, bars. You can also have flows. So you should always try to find the right type of chart that meets the conclusions you are trying to get. Then you have some settings like conversion criteria or filters. We always filter for employees' emails. So this means our data is not biased by employees' interactions. You can also create cohorts like trials or paid users or training. So it's easier to apply them and get the data filter as you need. And I also recommend you to leave annotations in the charts so you can see what has happened in some dates that might be causing or might be having impact on your flow. If you have any kind of change log, you can mirror the changes into annotations in the charts. And talking about the external warehouse approach, usually there are some supportive databases that you can use. In this case, Segment doesn't support SingleStore yet, but we use it. We have some in-house code that we run that copies all the events to our SingleStore instance, and then we just query as a regular database or data. So we have both approaches, usually depending on the people, on the person that is looking for data, they choose the approach they prefer. And I just want to leave you with this quote that I read some time ago, and it resonated with me. And the takeaway that I want you to take today is find your balance, find what works for your product and your team, and try to focus on fostering this culture of getting data, looking at the data, understanding how the user is interacting with your application, and try to adapt the product and your features to meet users' expectations and hopefully get a better user experience. So these are the 10 things that I wish I had known when I started working with front-end user tracking. And that's all I have for you today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Marta.